Everyone. This is Ryan Brocher from Matchstick Ventures. I got here my partner Natty Zola from Matchstick as well. Natty, want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
It's good. Awesome. Well, we're excited to be here, part of Twin Cities Startup Week, and offer up this workshop for everyone. The title of this is Building a Company from the Inside Out, and Natty will be leading most of this and throughout the presentation today. But we want this to be an open conversation as well, so feel free to chime in on the chat on the side if you've got questions, and then we should have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end as well. So in case people don't know, Matchstick Ventures, we're an early stage tech VC. I'm based in Minneapolis, Natty's based in Boulder, and we're doing pre-seed and seed deals all across our regions. I am former founder of the Twin Cities Startup Week from, gosh, 6-7 years ago now. Feels crazy how much it's grown. And also the co-founder of Beta Men originally. So got to know Natty through Techstars as well, and we've been partners on Matchstick ever since. So with that, I want to hand it over to Natty. Natty's going to be driving a lot of the workshop here. Yeah, look forward to seeing any of the questions you guys have on the chat as well. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So let's just make sure this works. Okay. Ryan, you can see my screen?
Yep, got it.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks for having me. I love doing this talk. It's something near and dear to my heart. So we'll jump right into it. And I would love for the session to be interactive. So feel free to add comments, questions. I'm going to ask for a little chat participation as well in certain parts. So it's a little more fun if it's interactive. So, all right, great. Oh, and then also, if you want to talk about this on in public or whatever, you can obviously tag Twin Cities Startup Week on Twitter. TCSW20 is the tag. One for this session is Inside Out. And then my Twitter handle is NattyZ. So let's jump right into it. All right. So one way that we think about startups is that you exist in this really big ecosystem. And ultimately, there's the leader or the leadership team. There's the team, the broader team that comes together. There's the company. And then there's your broader community, which is also your market. And most people, when they're thinking about startups or starting a company, focus on those outer rings, which is like, what's the community you're involved in or the market that you're involved in? What are we going to do as a company? But most companies neglect to focus on what are really the most important things, which is the leader and the team themselves. And in the ecosystem, we tend to have a lot of tools to manage and measure your company and how it's progressing, whether it's, a mixed panel to app analytics or whatever, or in your market, you're doing all this market research. But what about the stuff that's really at the core here, which is you as a leader and the team itself? So we're going to ask the question, why is it important to build a company from the inside out or from the leadership team out? A bunch of data show that 65% of startups fail due to co-founder or interpersonal issues. I hope that's not news to many of you, but it's always a surprising stat. And secondly, there was an amazing Google study that found they've tried to determine what were the common traits among the most high performing teams that they saw across Google. And they found that the only characteristic across all of them was a feeling of psychological safety. This was way more important than the skill sets on the team, the backgrounds of the people involved, the pressure around them or anything like that. High performing teams universally had psychological safety. And so we're going to talk about how if the number one killer for your startup is related to co-founder or interpersonal issues, and the way to make the most common trait among high performing teams is psychological safety, wouldn't you want the tools or resources to increase your odds of success by investing time and energy in addressing these two factors? So we think the way to do that is when you start a company is build it from the inside out. So as a leader, your actions and behaviors show up every day in the company. You don't realize how important every single thing you do trickles across the whole organization. Many of the things that you do are in your awareness, like you know what you're doing, you know how you're showing up. And even more of them are happening outside of your awareness. And all of these are the single biggest determinant in, can you avoid the trap of 65% of startups failing due to co-founder issues? And can you build a high performing team based around psychological safety? So the main question here is, how do you show up as a leader? And are you ready to be intentional about it? There's a thing called Johari's window, which is a technique that helps people better understand their relationships with themselves and others. And it looks like this. So there are 4 quadrants on it. You can see across the top, there are things about your personality that are known to yourself or not known to yourself. And on the left side, you'll see things that are known to others and things that are not known to others. So in the upper left, you'll see the open self. This is things that you know about yourself and that other people know about you. These are maybe more comfortable characteristics of our personality that we're excited to share with people or maybe come out more often. The upper right is the blind self. So this is things that other people notice about you or patterns that they see in you, but maybe you aren't aware of. In the lower left is your hidden self. So these are things that you know about your personality or your patterns, but you know them about yourself, but you try to keep them hidden from others. And then in the lower right is the unknown self. There's parts of our personalities and our patterns and our traits that aren't known to us and aren't known to others. And the goal here is, how do you move more of the blind self and the hidden self into your open self? So can you start to be more comfortable sharing the parts of you that are true and authentic, but maybe you keep from others? And can you create a culture where people who know you and see your patterns are willing to share those traits with you? The goal being, the more you know about yourself, the more you can know how you show up as a leader, and the more you can be intentional around the culture that you're creating in your company. The process of doing this is called radical self-inquiry, which is, this is a good description of it, the process by which self-deception becomes so skillfully and compassionately exposed that there's no mask that can hide it anymore. And so, underlying that maybe more sophisticated description is, how well do you know yourself and not deceiving yourself around who you are? And that's realizing that that all of us show up with great traits and great strengths, and we also all have weaknesses and things that hold us back. But that the only way to really grow your company and to grow is to grow yourself. So I'll share with you some easy ways of expanding Johari's window so that you have more awareness of yourself, and your team can help you realize this as well. So we're going to start with some of the easy ones. And we see that some of the top performing companies in our portfolio, whether at Matchstick or Ryan and I have both run a lot of Techstars programs. These are tactics that we've seen companies do time and time again that increase the level of understanding by the leadership and the leaders themselves, which gives them more of that psychological safety and more trust with each other. So the first is to check in. So we coach companies that when you start the day, everyone should, or if they can, check in. Are you red? Are you yellow? Are you green? So green is, I'm here, I'm present, I have energy. There's nothing really distracting me. I'm kind of good. Yellow is, there's something on my mind that's sort of distracting me. I'm pretty present, I'm functional, but there's something going on in my world, whether it's work or not work related, that's influencing how I'm showing up today. And then red is, hey, I'm here, but I'm really not here. There's something significant going on in my life or going on at work that's not enabling me to really be fully present and do my best today. Just knowing this for yourself and checking in, like, how am I showing up today? Am I green? Am I yellow? Am I red? Will give you a lot more empathy around what can you get done that day. And when you know where you start, that's when you can start to do things to start shifting yourself from red to yellow to green. And the more that you can understand where you're at and how you might shift, the more you are in control of the culture that you're creating and how you show up as a company. All right. Next, I'm going to share a bunch of, actually, I was going to ask this, if anyone's paying attention in the chat, feel free to chime in how you're doing today. So let's see. I'll start and I'll put in here, I'm feeling Rello today, which is sort of between green and yellow. So pretty present here today, excited to do this talk, but have some stuff going on that might, maybe is playing a little bit of a role in how I show up today. All right, next one here is there's a bunch of spectrums that people show up, have some patterns around. So the first is, are you someone who might be on the left side of the spectrum where you tend to ride the roller coaster? So you have high highs, you have low lows, you tend to swing sort of emotionally more than maybe your friends do. Or are you on the other side where you're more of a steady Eddie and you have kind of like a, you know, you have little blips in your day, but you're more of a consistent emotional package. One is not better than the other. It's all about just knowing like, where are you on this spectrum? So if you want to throw in the chat where you are, I tend to be a little bit more steady Eddie personally. So I'll put that there. But you know, just important to start knowing, hey, where is my home base on here? And then also starting to check in with your team, like where's your home base with your co-founder? Next up is, do you tend to be more conflict seeking or more conflict avoidant? So this shows up in our work every day, right? Conflict seeking people tend to build connection through conflict. Conflict avoidant people have struggle to build connection through conflict. And so what is your home base on here? Where do you show up? This will really influence how the culture of your company is built and how you interact with your team. So again, on this one, I'll put in here, I'm more avoidant conflict style. So, and again, one's not better than the other. Both have great strengths and great weaknesses. But what this is this is sort of easy process of radical self-inquiry to know like, okay, how am I showing up today? What is my home base? What are some of my patterns? Here's a fun one. Do you tend to be more of a perfectionist or more of a satisficer? So a perfectionist is someone who maybe you're uncomfortable shipping your product till it's 99.9% what you envisioned it to be. Or a satisficer might say, hey, you know, it's 60% of the way there. Let's ship it. Let's start getting some customer data. Where do people end on this spectrum? I tend to be more on the perfectionist side of things. But again, not better or worse than satisficer, but just where you are. So you can see Ryan put on here satisficer. So when Ryan and I are working on things, right, we know that I'm going to push for something to be perfect before it's ready, which will probably result in us shipping better stuff. Ryan will be more comfortable shipping earlier, which may mean we ship it before I'm comfortable, but he's going to push us to get it out in market sooner so we can get customer validation. So both have a great place on a team. All right, here's one. Do you tend to look at the world through rose-colored glasses, or do you tend to be more of a cynic? Again, both are great. You actually kind of want both in your company, but where do you show up? Like, what's your home base? So on this one, I tend to be more rose glasses. It looks like Ryan is also, which doesn't surprise me as VCs, because we always
as VCs we pretty much have to be,
right. Right. So, you know, again, where's your home base on here? This is sort of radical self-inquiry about knowing like who you are. And the more you know about who you are, the more you know how you're going to show up as a leader. So we just went through a bunch of fun, sort of easy ones of these. And there's a ton of other spectrums that people could throw out in the comments if they want, like what might be another spectrum that people could be on. Here's some harder ways of doing radical self-inquiry. So meditation is a really powerful practice to spend time on. You can hire a coach or work with a coach who can help you better understand your patterns and your psychology. You can spend a lot of time checking in on like what triggers you to get angry or what creates emotional response in yourself. So you can start to see patterns in that. We love a theory of leadership called conscious leadership, which does a lot of work on uncovering these patterns for you. You can do a lot of journaling. So you can start to see patterns. Personality assessments like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, leadership circle, like all of those are great ways of understanding yourself. You can do a strength and weaknesses assessment. You can learn what your love languages are, which is a really fun thing to do. And if you want to get really scientific on it, you can figure out what your attachment style is, which is basically a lot of theory around how you were raised shows up in your personality throughout your whole life. So I didn't want to go into all of these. We only have a short talk here, but I wanted to say, you know, some of the stuff we're doing here is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that radical self-inquiry about understanding who you are and how you might show up as a leader. And so at the end of the day, the better you know yourself, the better you can lead. And you can start being intentional about how you show up. and learn how do you shift to different states so that you can be the leader you want to be. So hopefully over time you can start to ask the questions, how do I show up? How am I showing up? What are my patterns? And what do I want to change about myself? And we believe that the more you do that, personal growth will drive your professional growth. So in many scenarios, we've seen that the CEO or the founding team are actually the limiting factor for the potential success of the company, because they're unwilling to do the personal growth that it takes to get to the next stages. And the reality is when you start a company, you need a certain skill set and a certain EQ and a certain, focus. But as that company scales, those responsibilities on you change. And so you need to also change along with it. But you can't change if you don't know where you are today. So that's the first phase of building a company from the inside out. The next phase is to add the team layer on it. And it's our belief that there's no more important relationship than between the co-founders. We already talked about that stat where 65% of startups fail because of co-founder issues. So this is clearly spend some time and do some thinking as a team. So the question is, how do you show up for each other? Back to this red, yellow, green here is, do you know how your co-founder is doing on any given day? If your co-founder had something happen in their personal life that made it that they couldn't focus that day, or they were distracted, do you know that? Or do you have a platform or a tool in your toolkit for that person to tell you how they're showing up that day? If they show up red, might you interact with them differently that day? Maybe you could offer to take something off their plate. Maybe if they're late delivering something to you, instead of feeling a sense of anger and resentment towards them, you'd have some empathy because you knew that there was something going on in their world. All of this provides context, right? And so context is the underlying factor to building a trusting relationship with your team. All of those spectrums that we went through earlier, is really healthy to go through those and come up with more with your co-founders or your leadership team and figure out, like, where is everyone's home base on this? And I think when you do that, you'll start to see, oh, that's why we always have this disagreement. One of the people I used to work with is a woman named Julie Penner, who actually did a lot of this work with, and I gave her a shout out at the bottom of these slides. She and I were basically on the opposite ends of most of those spectrums. And until we realized that, and then realized if that's the case, then we realized, oh, it's the context of how we're working together that's causing these disagreements. It's not that we're actually disagreeing with each other. We all of a sudden snapped into this high performing state because we knew how each other would show up, and we could have more empathy for those conversations and understand our home bases. So all of this stuff, if you do it for yourself and then bring your team in, provides context to becoming a more high performing team. So at the end of the day, you have radical self-inquiry, which is understanding yourself, plus the context of everyone else on your team, plus the openness that it requires to do this kind of work and be vulnerable with each other, leads to something that we call positive sentiment override. And positive sentiment override is basically, in any given situation, do you assume positive, so that the person is trying to do their best and you assume sort of the positive side of things and give people the benefit of the doubt? Or do you have negative sentiment override, which is assuming the opposite? Common pattern with founding teams is the first 6 months are great and they're kind of humming along because they haven't really hit any bumps and it's cool and sexy to start a company. But all of a sudden, after 6 months, it starts to get hard and you're kind of in the trenches. And a lot of the inherent positive sentiment override for a founding team or a leadership team turns into negative sentiment override. You start to default to disagree. You start to have little quarrels over stupid things. You start to go home kind of resenting each other. That's a really poisonous place to be as a company. And so if you want to avoid that and continue to have, avoid that 65% of startups fail because of co-founder issues and developing that psychological safety, you want to start adding these tools in so that you understand the context of the relationship. You understand yourself and you have the openness to build that trusting relationship. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy, but it does mean that you'll have a higher likelihood of succeeding as a team. So again, at the end of the day, you need to invest time in getting to know each other. What triggers each of you? How do you fight? How do you fight effectively? What are your vulnerabilities as a person? How do we meet and greet each other? Like, all of these are just example questions to start to understand is how does that team come together, building a company from the inside out, almost before you can really even take a product to market, because that team is so critical at the early stages. And then it's our belief that relationship comes before company. And so if you prioritize building that relationship, even though it maybe doesn't feel like the most important thing when you want to get a product out the door, it is still more important than getting the product out the door to invest in that relationship. I want to come back to this study by Google talking about psychological safety being the number one determinant of high performing teams. If you do this work, which is understanding yourself, bringing the context of yourself into your company, and spending the time to get to know each other and building these frameworks or these mindsets around how you're going to work together, where your home base is, what your patterns are, we have seen that it has driven a huge increase in psychological safety on founding teams, which then drives high performance. The way that you'll see this show up in your team and what Google found was that colleagues felt like they were cared for. Just the simple fact of, hey, my teammates actually care for me, which comes from understanding people's context and getting to know them. And everyone ended up speaking about the same amount. And so the pattern to get everyone to speak about the same amount is to build that empathy, that trust, and understand the context of everyone so that they feel comfortable doing that. So we assume you want to be successful as a company. We assume you want to have a high-performing team. You want to avoid failure. It all comes down to these practices. So building a great company is like building a house. It starts with the foundation, which is starting to understand what is the inside of the company, the leader and the team, and how are you building that relationship. So that's actually the end of the presentation that we have here. We want to give you some quick tools we want to give you the mindset of building a company from the inside out and encourage you as a founding team to spend the time investing in some work on yourself, some work on your team, so that you can be the strongest version of yourselves and show up for each other and have a higher likelihood of succeeding. You want to be in that 35% of startups that don't fail due to co-founder issues. And you want to build a culture that produces high-performing teams within your organization. And these are the easiest ways to do it. Plus, it makes building a company more fun, right? Like, this is, at the end of the day, a human sport, right? We spend time together. It's where we you wouldn't do this if you didn't want to spend the time with the people that are around the table with you. So why not invest in those relationships? So we're happy to, if there's any questions on this, we're happy to open up for Q&A. I don't know, Ryan, if there's anything you wanted to add on this, but we're happy to talk more if anyone has any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I think the only thing was that is, like, when we see this, like, in our portfolio of companies, these companies tend to scale faster. They acquire the talent quicker. And I think it's like a strategic advantage for them. It's something that I know, Natty, you and I really screen for when we look at the founders of companies to say, like, maybe they don't have this whole system in place, but do they have the, mindset that this is something that they would want to go to? And if you were to look across our portfolio, I think you would almost universally see that the founders have this kind of mindset of, like, how do they create their organizations and build that to have this, inside out mentality. So it's not only like something that we love to talk about, it's something we love to see actually when we make investments.
Yeah, and it's also not, I don't want it to sound like, oh my God, this is hard work. Actually it is hard work, right? You have to, like, get to know yourself, which is cool. It's not hard work in like, you have to want to commit to it, to putting the time and energy into it. But at the end of the day, we look at it and it's probably 2 to 3% of your time as a company doing this kind of work. So imagine the leverage on that, right? You're spending maybe 2 to 5% of your time investing in the relationships and understanding yourself so that you can eliminate the single greatest risk to startups and produce a high performing culture. It seems to us totally worth it. Looks like we got a question here from Matt. Thanks for the kind words. Do you have examples of practical applications of using the color scale and some of the other things in companies? What does that look like in practice? Yeah, absolutely. So most of the companies we work with, when they do their daily stand-up, whether it's, if it's a really young company and it's a team of 3 or 4 people at the start, they're probably doing a daily stand-up. We actually encourage them to start with a red, yellow, green check-in. So everyone goes around and says, I'm green today. Maybe someone says, I'm red today. And when you check in as a caller, you're not asking for someone to solve that for you. So one of the rules is if someone checks in red and they can choose to tell you why or not, the next immediate thing is not to say, oh, well, let me help you with that. It's just to say, thanks for sharing. Because the goal is, you're not asking for help. You're just giving the context of how are you that day. So we see that show up in stand-ups with teams. Ryan and I and other people I work with, like on a given meeting, we might just start a meeting with like, hey, let's do a quick red, yellow, green. Let's see how it's going around the table. Maybe, it just starts the meeting in a nice place because you get a little bit of context, like how's everyone doing? So that's more of one that happens pretty frequently throughout the week. The other stuff where you're like on a spectrum or whatever, usually companies just spend, let's sit down for an hour and just like come up with some of these spectrums. And let's figure out where each of our home bases are and have some conversations. And then from that, you want to start thinking about patterns. So I'll give an example of with Julie Penner, who was a former colleague of mine at Techstars. We kept having these fights around or disagreements around when to ship product. And we figured out that on that spectrum, she was a satisfizer and I was a perfectionist. And almost all of our disagreements came down to, I was only comfortable shipping when something was like 99 or 95% confident. And she wanted to ship at 80%. The percentages don't really matter. But what we ended up, once we realized that, is we had this phrase that we invited each other to say, which is, hey, she would ask me, Natty, is that in the 10%? And it gave me a moment to pause and say, am I being a perfectionist here, or does this really matter to me? And I would tell Julie and I would say, is this good enough? And it would give her a chance to pause and say, is this, am I so excited to ship this that I haven't made sure that it's actually good enough? And so what that did was understanding where we were on that spectrum gave us a vocabulary together to work more comfortably together. And once we started having that vocabulary, we had way fewer disagreements. And the reality is like so many times she would reveal to me and she'd say, Natty's that in the top 10% for you. And I would say, you know what, you're right, it's not. And we would ship something and she would be totally right. And so it was really helpful for me to move out of my sort of home base when she was right. Another quick tactical one here is a lot of times when you're disagreeing with someone in your company, you can pause that conversation and ask each person, how important is this decision to you? And if you just take that moment to like take yourself out of the content of whatever you're debating and understand the context of the conversation, you realize like, I might say, this is on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 3 to me. Another person says, this is a 9 to me. And all of a sudden, when you know that, you say, oh my God, like, why am I fighting about this? Like, this is more important to you. Like, let's go your way, right? This is something that you care more about. So those are just a few little tactical ways that we see this show up. And it's great. We love learning from our companies and seeing how it shows up. Maybe I'll share one more advanced one, which is maybe as you get further down the road, we have companies who pay for coaching or bring in coaches for their leadership team or their whole staff to help them do that radical self-inquiry on themselves and then bring that into the company itself. All right, Brian, got a question from you. As a founder working on implementing these practices from the start, my intuition tells me that while difficult, they're easier to implement at an earlier stage than to adopt later. Is this consistent with our portfolio companies? Yeah, I mean, everything's easier to do earlier. And so, your culture is basically you're going to have a culture whether you are intentional about it or not. The earlier you can be intentional about it, the easier it is. But we've seen companies adopt this when they're scaling. There's not a bad time to do it, but it is easier if you do it earlier, and know that it's going to evolve too. Like the stuff that you do as you're not going to know the red, yellow, green for everyone in your company when you're 100 people. But maybe what you do is that you do red, yellow, green from when you're 15 people and you encourage all your managers in your company to do it with them. And when you're 100 people, you walk around the office and people are doing their own stand-ups and they're checking in red, yellow, or green. And you realize that this has permeated the whole culture of the company. And so it's really cool to start it early, but there's never a bad time to bring it in. All right, Murtaza, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Cool name. Any off the beaten path tips on working with virtual teams? Yeah, so obviously we're all in a new world here today. Wish we could be in person for this talk. all of this stuff still works virtually. Like there's some cool Slack tools that you can do some check-ins with. So if you're doing stuff like that, you can build it in where you say like, hey, in our stand-up channel on Slack or whatever, like, in the morning, everyone just check in and give a quick update of how you're doing via text. Like that works. We tend to like it a little bit more face-to-face. Like I think there's a little bit more empathy built. It's nice to see each other. So maybe you still do your stand-ups via Zoom and you incorporate this. We haven't seen the virtual nature of work right now really impact this. Besides, you don't have those sort of organic connecting sessions that you might have in an office setting where you just would like sit down and chat with someone. And I do think you need a little bit extra sense of context when it's virtual because I don't know, people are on better behavior when you're in person, a little bit worse behavior when you're sort of hiding behind a video camera, especially if your video camera's off. So I think it's probably a little bit harder virtually. So you need to be a little bit more intentional about it. So maybe like some hacks here is use video as much as you can and try to just build it into your existing workflow practice.
Sorry, Natty. There's an inside joke between Matt and I on pizza questions. He's the pizza man. So
nice. Yeah. Good questions. If anyone wants to add any other questions, I know we have a few extra minutes here. So
yeah. Kate had a question around what resources communities shape your thinking on this topic.
Yeah, there's a lot. Actually, I can. If you hold on a second here, I will pull up, I can probably show you, I'll pull it up here. I have like a list of books that I can share with you. There's a lot of resources here on this. Julie Penner, who I did a bunch of work with this during Techstars, is a great resource. So she's influenced a lot of the work that Ryan and I have done. Let me pull up here a list of things, if you wouldn't mind waiting a second. A lot of great books on the topic. So I'm looking over here at my bookshelf. A favorite is looking more at conscious leadership, which is an amazing practice. It's really a formalized way of doing this kind of work is great. Let's see here. All right, I'm just going to pull this up here. See if I can make sure this is the right slide deck. My computer's chugging a little bit here. I guess we're challenging it here with streaming presentation and stuff, although it should be pretty good. A great book, I'll just riff off some books here while I'm pulling this up, is The Big Leap by a guy named Gay Hendricks. It's a really great book on this. I love a lot of the work by Brene Brown, who's pretty popular these days. Simon Sinek has a bunch of work on finding your own why, which is really good. There's a great book called The 5 Love Languages, which gets into what makes you feel positive in life. Just looking over at my bookshelf over here. And then I'm also going to pull up a list of other books. Sorry, this is taking a little longer than I expected. There's a great resource, Reboot, which is a network of coaches actually based here in Boulder, which is really powerful. So they do these boot camps. 10% Happier is a really good meditation product. Great book too. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. I read it, totally changed my view on meditation. A great book by Parker Palmer called Let Your Life Speak. I have the slide up here now, and instead of trying to share it, I'm just going through what's on it. The Simon Sinek Find Your Why is a great book. The Power of Vulnerability, which is an audio by Brene Brown, is really great on this. So maybe those are some of the stuff that's been most influential for us and pretty approachable. Matt asks, what are our love languages? That's an awesome one. Well, let me share what all of them are so that you guys know. So they are, you can either have receiving of gifts, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, or verbal praise. So mine is, this is kind of how it feels like vulnerable to admit this, but it's physical touch and kudos or whatever, words of praise.
Mine would be acts of service, I think, first and foremost, and then probably touch as well.
Yep.
Which you can't really do that as much anymore. So that language may be lost outside of family.
That's what I got to figure out. That to that question around how do you do this virtually or in a remote nature. The love language around physical touch is really tough these days.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think Brian had another comment here. He recently read Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage with his co-founder. Highly recommended. Yeah, that's awesome. I literally have it right here on my bookshelf. That's anything by Lencioni is really good. This is at The Advantage. It's a great recommendation. Yeah, folks have other recommendations of good books. Throw them in the comments over here.
Awesome.
Kate, do you have any, but if you're welcome to just chime in the chat here. Do you have any good book recommendations for you that have been influential for you? Oh, actually, I neglected to mention maybe the most important book, which I'm going to pull it up here. This book is incredible. It's called An Everyone Culture. And it's about becoming a deliberately developmental organization. And this book highlights 3 companies across 3 industries. So they highlight Bridgewater Capital, which many people know is maybe the most successful hedge fund, a chain of movie theaters that I can't remember what it's called in California, and a tech company in North Carolina. And all 3 of those companies independently are top of their industry. And what they realized is that the most important product that they're building as a company is each individual person in their company. And so they have these sort of radically open cultures where they spend a ton of time and energy on personal and professional development, because the belief is if you just invest in that, good business will come from it and you'll be successful. And there's just amazing stories in there around how they've done that. Good tip here from Murtaza around emotional intelligence 2.0. I think I have that over here. That also has yeah, do I have that over here? I don't know if I have it over here. Yeah, that's a great one too. All right. Anyone have any other questions? All right.
Looks like we're good.
What tree is that in my background? That is a little jade tree that is growing sideways and was in our house facing another window growing the wrong way. So I brought it in here so that it could try to work its way straight. So
Nice.
Thanks.
Right on. Cool. Well,
all right. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And if anyone, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. It's just our emails are just Ryan@MatchstickVentures.com and Natty@MatchstickVentures.com. Happy to follow up with anything on that. Natty's a master at this stuff, so probably best to reach out to him if it's specific to this. But anything in the startup realm, we're always happy to chat. So thanks everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of Startup Week.
Thanks everyone.